Hi everyone. So in today's video, I'm going to be demonstrating how you can take a map in a simple GIS client project and share that as an interactive web mapping application across the internet. Now for this, we'll use a simple GIS server instance, and this can be an on-premise solution that we offer in which you download and install the simple GIS server program on your own hardware, or it can be our hosted service that we also offer, in which we provide a virtual dedicated simple GIS server instance in the cloud. The other thing you need to do is to make sure that you have the GIS Server Admin plugin loaded into your simple GIS client application. So to check this, within your project in Simple GIS Client, locate the File drop-down menu, and underneath this menu item, look for a menu named Plugins. And as you click that menu item, you should get a dialog box, and this dialog lists all the available plugins for Simple GIS Client. The last entry in this list is the Simple GIS Server Admin plugin. And as you click on this, you should notice an indication here along the right side of the dialog box of whether the plugin is installed or not. If it is installed, you would get this green checkbox with the installed information. If not, you can simply click the Install Now button to download the installer and then run the installer to install the plugin. Once you have installed it, I recommend that you would go ahead and restart your Simple GIS client application just to make sure that the plugin loads the next time you launch it. I'm going to go ahead and dismiss this dialog for now. And in this scenario, I have a basic map. I have a project here in my Simple GIS client application with just a basic map that's loaded. I have a couple of tile mapping base maps loaded. I have the OpenStreetMap, which is what is currently turned on. And I also have an OpenTopo map. And both of these are tile mapping services that I've connected to, and I'm using that as base maps. In addition to that, I have a couple of other layers loaded. I have a county boundaries, which is just a shapefile, and it has some polygon boundaries of some counties. And then I also have a populated places shapefile, which is just a point feature of place names across this region. Now you'll notice none of these are visible currently, and that's because of the scale range that I have set on this particular layer. I'm currently outside of those limits that I set for this layer. If I was to zoom in, and as I get in closer, I would see these points become visible as I enter within the scale tolerance that was set for that layer. And of course, as I zoom out, as I exceed the scale tolerance set for the layer, I see that those points are no longer visible. So to publish this as a web mapping application, very easily, all I have to do is go to my File drop-down menu, and once I have the Simple GIS Server Admin plugin loaded, I would notice I would have a new menu option at the bottom of this drop-down called Administer Simple GIS Server. And as I click on this menu item, I get this dialog box that appears, and at this point I would enter the URL of my Simple GIS Server instance. Now make sure you don't need to include the HTTP or HTTPS in front of your URL. Just enter the URL, and then you would click the Connect button to actually connect to your Simple GIS Server instance. Now this would be the URL if you were running an on-premises solution. This would be the URL that you've set up for your particular server that you're running the Simple GIS Server instance on. Or if you're subscribed to our hosted service, this would be the URL that would be emailed to you for your dedicated Simple GIS Server instance in the cloud. As you click Connect, you'll get a login where you would enter your user credentials. And once you've entered that, you click OK. And if you connect it successfully, you would see here underneath the URL the available storage space on your Simple GIS server instance. So right now I just have just about 14.3 gigabytes of storage on this particular instance available. Now to publish a web map of my existing Simple GIS client project, I just simply come here to Publish Web Maps. As I click this button, I get a new dialog. And the first thing I would need to do is select the workspace that I want to publish the web map to. By default, all Simple GIS server instances have a public workspace, and a public workspace allows you to publish maps that you want to be visible to everyone. As long as they have the URL, they would be able to view the map without having to have a separate sign-on. Now, if you wanted to restrict visibility for your web map application, you could create additional workspaces in Simple GIS server and restrict access to those workspaces to specific users. And in that case, they would have to sign on to the web map in order to view the web map. But for this scenario, I'm just going to select the public workspace, and then I would enter a name for my web map. I'll make this very easy. I'm just going to call it my web map. And next, I'm going to enter in information for my title block that will appear on my web map page. So you can select a logo that you would like to appear in the title block. This is just simply an image that will be used to display within the title block. If you've previously have published web maps and you've used a certain logo, it'll default to that last logo used. If not, you can always click the select logo to bring up a file dialog box, allowing you to choose another image file that you would like to use in your logo. You can also enter in a title within this title block as well as a subtitle, and then you could indicate what position you would like the title block to occupy on your web page. So it could be in the upper left corner, the bottom left corner, upper right, or bottom right corners. I'm going to leave it set to what it is currently is the top right corner. And then I'm going to come down and select the base layers that I want to be visible within my interactive web map application. By default, any layer that you have loaded in your current Simple GIS client map that is a tile mapping service or a web mapping service would appear here as potential base maps. So in this case, I do have two layers that were loaded on the OpenStreetMap tile mapping service as well as the OpenTopoMap tile mapping service. So I'm actually going to have both of those in my web mapping application, and I'll give the user the opportunity to select which one they want to use as their base map. And so the way I do that, I just check the box next to each layer name underneath the base maps. And then for the initial layer visibility, I just select the layer that I want to be visible as the default. So I'm going to leave OpenStreetMap as the default layer that will be visible. So I'll uncheck the OpenTopoMap. Next, I need to select the other layers that I want to publish to my web mapping application. So I'm going to use the populated places and the county boundaries just by checking the boxes next to those layer names. As I select one of these layers, if I click on them and select them, I'll see all of the available attribute data here on the right side. And so I can indicate what attribute information I want to be visible in my web mapping application. By default, all attribute fields are checked and selected. If I didn't want to include an attribute field, I just simply uncheck its box. I can also enter in a field name alias for any of these attribute fields by selecting the field, and then I could type in a field alias for that particular field, which is what would show in your pop-up box when you click on a feature in your web map application. I can also indicate which layers I want to include in my legend in my web map application. So I'm actually going to include both the populated places and the county boundaries. And you can also indicate the position as well for your legend, whether you want that again in the upper left corner, bottom left corner, upper right, or bottom right corner. For this example, I'm going to leave it set to the bottom right corner. A couple of other settings you can select is what kind of coordinate precision do you want for your GeoJSON data. And so any of these shapefile layers that will be served from your simple GIS server instance to your web map application to the user's browsers, wherever they may be across the internet, that data is served in a GeoJSON format. And so you can choose for the coordinates for those geometry features that's going to be served out across the internet, the level of precision. So this is a number of decimal places. The default is 5, and I can increase that or reduce this. The benefit is if I reduce it, it saves on the amount of data transfer that has to transfer across the internet, just because it's less information that has to transfer. But I do sacrifice some precision on the coordinates themselves. If I increase this, of course, I gain that precision, but then it takes more data, and therefore you have a greater data packet that's being transferred across the internet, which could potentially affect performance. It just depends on how many features really that you're serving out. And so normally, typically, it'd be just as well just to leave it set to the default at this point. You can also select a layer that you want to be able to search for different features on. So if there was a specific layer in your web mapping application you wanted users to be able to search for features within, you would select that layer. So for example, if I wanted to choose populated places, and then I would select the field that has the information I want them to be able to search by. So I'm going to select the feature name field. And again, you can select the position for the search bar, whether you want it in the upper left corner, bottom left corner, upper right, bottom right. I'm going to leave it set to the default, which is the upper left. And then finally, you can also select whether you want to include the ability for users to locate areas by street address. So if you check this include address search, it'll add another search tool to your web mapping application, allowing users to enter street addresses to search for locations by. And if you do check this box, the other thing you would need to choose is what geocoder you want your web map application to use. You have two choices. You have the U.S. Census Bureau geocoding service, or you can use the OSM or OpenStreetMap geocoding service. Again, the U.S. Census Geocoder service would only work for U.S. street addresses. So if you are serving a web map that's going to be accessing areas outside of the United States, then you would definitely need to choose the OpenStreetMap geocoding service to include for street address searching. I'm going to leave this off for now, so I'll just uncheck it. And then once all that's set, to publish your map, all you have to do is come to the upper right corner of your dialog and select Publish Web Map to Server. When you click, you'll get a status here showing you the status of the publishing of the data. And then once it's published, you'll return to your Administer Simple GIS Server dialog. And that's all it is. Your web mapping application has now been published. And to access that, any users using a web browser, let me dismiss this dialog so we can see what I'm entering here. So all you would need is any user with a web browser just needs to enter in the URL for your web map, which is your URL for the Simple GIS server instance, which in this example, it was my sgs01.simplegiscloud.net. And then they would do a slash, and then they would enter the workspace where you published your web map to, and then another slash, and then the name that we named the web map, which was my web map, and then slash, and then all web mapping applications end with an sgsmap.html. Once you enter that URL, you'll be brought to the web mapping application. And since this was published to the public workspace, there's no sign-in required. So again, anyone with this URL can access this web mapping application. And as we see, here's the title block in the upper right corner. As we said, this was the image we had chosen for the logo. Here's the title and then the subtitle we entered. Here is the layer control for this particular web mapping application. And if I hover over that, I see that I have two base maps, the two that we had chosen when we published this. I have the OpenStreetMap, which is visible by default, and then I have an OpenTopo map. And so if I chose that base map, it would toggle off the OpenStreetMap and make the OpenTopo map the visible base map. And then I also have the other two layers that we've published, the county boundaries and the populated places. And I see that both of these are currently checked, indicating they are turned on. And I can see the county boundaries here, but you notice I don't see the populated places points that we published. But if you recall, in our simple GIS client map, we had set a scale threshold for the populated places such that they only become visible within certain scale ranges. And so when you published your web map, it honors those scale settings on your layers. And so if I go back to my web browser, if I was to zoom in on this map, I would see that as I zoomed within those that scale threshold, those points become visible as well. And then as I zoom out of that scale threshold, they become invisible. And of course, I can click on any of these features to bring up the attribute data. And again, this is based upon all the attribute data that we published with that layer. And if I was to zoom into the populated places, and if I was to click on one of these points, I would see that attribute data as well. The other thing I would like to illustrate is here in the bottom right corner where we had set it to be visible is our legend tool button. Right now the legend is collapsed. If I was to click on this button, I would see that the legend would appear with the layers that we selected to appear in the legend. I can click it again to make the legend collapse. And then here's my search tool button. Remember, we had set the ability to search on the layer populated places by the feature names. So if I click on this search bar and I could just begin to type in a value into the search bar, and then it would pull up potential values that's within my populated places layer. And if I was to select one of these values, it would zoom to that area. And so that's the web mapping application. So hopefully this shows you how easy it was to publish. Now, one other feature I do want to show you that is unique to Simple GIS as well. If I go back to my Simple GIS client application, you wouldn't have noticed it when I published it, but when I published the web map, it actually also published these two layers here, the populated places and county boundaries, as layers to my simple GIS server instance. And so those layers reside on that server instance, and it actually converted these into replicated layers on my client application currently. So what I mean by that is when you publish a layer to Simple GIS server, other Simple GIS client users can connect to and access those layers and add them to their maps as a client server layer, which means it's a live connection. And as changes are made on the server, they're visible in the client immediately. Or you can connect to it as a replicated layer. which means it makes a copy of the layer from the server to your local hard drive that you can use that layer offline. And if you were to make edits to the layer, or if someone else made edits to the layer on the server, you can periodically synchronize that layer to the server to incorporate changes you've made back to the server or download changes anyone else has made to your local copy. And so to demonstrate, so like I said, it went ahead and converted these from just regular shape files to replicated layers that are now published to my Simple GIS server instance. And so if I was to come and edit this particular layer, like this county boundary here, I would come and toggle layer edit. And if I was to edit one of these features, so let's select this county boundary here, and you notice it already kind of has this unusual kind of vertex. It's kind of looks like an anomaly that's out, kind of giving that irregular shape. So we'll correct that. So if I click on this layer to edit it, and I'm going to right click and select vertex edit to actually edit the vertex. And I'm not going to make this real accurate, but I'm just going to drag this vertex back in to make it more kind of a straight line as it should be. And now I'm going to toggle, not on this, I'm sorry, I'm going to come back to my layer and toggle editing off. So I'm going to toggle layer edit off. Now it's going to ask me, do you want to sync layer changes to the server? Again, because this is a replicated layer I'm working with offline, I've made some edits, and now I'm saving my edit, or not really saving them, I'm just toggling off my edit state. And it's recognizing that this is a replicated layer, so it's saying, do you want to sync these layer changes back to the server? And if I say sync changes now, again, I'm going to have to log in. Let me shrink my browser down. And then once it's finished syncing, that dialog box disappears. Here is my corrected shape that I've made. So now everything's good in the Simple GIS client. I can clear my selection set. I have this polygon still selected. I can see that it's highlighted, but I can clear that. But what I wanted to show, it really is, since I synced this edit back to the server, anybody on the web browser that was viewing this, now if they were to view this again, they would see, if you notice, it went from the original shape, we zoom back out, that had the, the vertex that was kind of the anomaly that came out, that jutted out, and has now been corrected. So it matches what the edit we just made and post it back to the server. So I can edit this layer in my Simple GIS client application, and as I make those edits and sync them back to the server, they become visible in the web mapping application. So hopefully this was useful. I encourage you, visit our website for more information, simplegissoftware.com. That's the website. And if you have questions, drop us a line. There's a contact us page. We'd love to hear from you. So hopefully you'll find this to be a very useful feature. We think and hope that this will be very useful for sharing your maps and data out across the internet with other users. So thank you for your attention. And again, the website, if you have questions, is simplegissoftware.com. Thank you.